Thanks very much. I'll now go to Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you. I want to go to, I want to ask about the Worker Retention Grant Program. On the 15th of August, Minister Ali said during question time, I'll quote from what she said, that that's why our historic announcement of a 15% pay rise across the early childhood education sector is incredibly important. This pay rise means that by the end of this year, early childhood educators, around 200,000 of them right across Australia, will get at least $100 in their pay packets. By the end of next year, that will be at least $150. So can I ask, by December 31, so the end of the year, how many early childhood educators had received a 10% pay rise through this program?
So Senator Kylie Crane, Deputy Secretary Early Childhood and Youth. So the numbers that Minister Ali is quoting, the 200,000, is those that are eligible under the worker retention payment, subject to their employers lodging an application that is complete and accurate and compliant. So in terms of, I might, if you're okay, Senator Sullivan, outline that, what we've got, what's on hand, that will give you a sense and give you the answer to your question as well around December in that.
Yes. Noting though, she didn't put that caveat on it. She said will get a pay rise.
Have you got that? We just don't have that in front of us,
Sure.
Senator.
Is it possible to get that statement? Or is it a press release or a statement? Or
Yeah, I can.
Sorry, just to help us understand.
I'll have to just take a photo. It's in amongst other things, but yeah.
Oh, you can share them too.
Sure.
It'll just help us with the full context. I'm
anyway,
sorry.
but continue with what you're saying. So it's still
Let's give you the full information.
No,
yeah.
That's okay. So what I'm going to give you in part, Senator, is information current as at yesterday, and within that we will break up the December payment as well. So you have that. Yeah. So as at yesterday, we had applications. We had 1,982 applications. That covers around 59% of all eligible services. Which is around 8,634. Within those applications, there is around 148,101 workers that are covered by the applications that we have on hand, and 74% of all eligible workers. So that 200,000 that was referred to earlier. In terms of executed grants, so once an application is assessed, it meets the conditions and it's compliant, there is a grant offered and executed. So in terms of executed agreements, we have 119 executed agreements which cover 38,642 workers. We have a number of other agreements that have been offered and are awaiting execution. So they're with the providers to be executed, and that will cover another portion of workers as well. We can break that down. In terms of your question around the December date, so as at December, the number of, and this is workers, so there's a range of workers that are eligible in there. By the 31st of December, approximately 29,300 workers would have received that worker retention payment, and so those numbers that I talked about included those as well, and then since then other workers will have received the payment.
So 29,300 individuals?
That's
workers,
correct.
yes.
Yeah. So Minister Ali said that there'd be 200,000, so just over 10% actually have. So is this yet another broken promise from the Albanese government?
Couldn't be further from the truth there.
How else do I explain
This is something that we're really proud to be delivering on. We recognise that these workers deserve a pay rise. They were ignored for so long by the previous coalition government, which is something that we want to rectify. I think that the Deputy Secretary has given an account of how we are dealing with the issues that we're confronting, but we remain committed to ensuring that these really important workers are respected and paid appropriately.
How much of the $3.6 billion has been spent so far?
So, Senator, about 60 million has been allocated through the payments so far, noting that, as was indicated by Ms Crane, we have 148,000 workers applications in terms of the applications covering 148,000 workers currently on hand. And so we're processing all those applications. We're working with the providers in relation to those applications. But in terms of where we are at the moment, it's 60 million.
Yeah.
The 3.6, remember, is over a number of years.
Yeah, sure. But that's still a long way short, even if it is over the forwards.
I'm not sure it's short. It's just that the applications have come through and we're processing those
So
applications.
is there a bottleneck in processing? Is it complicated to process to apply? I mean, what's
Sure.
why is
Senator,
it so undersubscribed, as I might describe it?
not really undersubscribed per se. Obviously, it's up to services as to whether they wish to apply for this or not, so it's their choice. We've got 60% of all services have now applied for it. Services have up until June, July?
So, Michelle Caro, Acting First Assistant Secretary, Evidence and Reform Division. So providers that apply by the 30th of June will be eligible for backdating until the 2nd of December, but they have up until the end of the program, which is a 2-year program. Just to clarify, it's not over the forwards. That funding is only over 2 years.
It's been brought to our attention that the department is funding some third-party organisations to help services with their application for the worker retention program. When was this decision made to offer this support?
I don't have the decision, the date that the decision was made, but I can talk through the grant guideline, the grant and the providers, also the organisations that have been involved in that grant process. So we have 8 eligible organisations that have received grants under the worker engagement grant. They have a range of kind of expertise. So we've got organisations there covering unions, employer groups, employee groups, and particular cohorts. So SNAKE, for example, is one of those. And they're part of the program because of their understanding of the sector, their experience with industrial instruments, and their ability to work with the sector and their coverage. So it was in the 24-25 MyEFO. So in November that was released, that program.
So that's when the decision was made?
That's right.
And can we get a list of those providers?
Yes, we can. I can give it to you now if you'd like.
Have you got it just as a list? I don't want to
I can give you a
take
list.
up the time.
Absolutely, we can take that one on
Right.
notice. I don't have it separately, but we can take that on notice and provide that.
Can I get that today, though?
Yep.
Sorry. So, why are they needed? Why are they needed? Is it a complex process, and that's why they're needing that assistance? Can you explain to me the rationale?
So part of the program, or the government's intent as part of the program, is that there are a number of eligibility criteria associated with the eligibility of the payment, and one of those relates to obviously passing the full costs on to employees to ensure that employees are actually receiving the funding that providers get from the government. And the way to actually kind of us to ensure that is happening is through an eligible and compliant workplace instrument. We are finding that providers, there's a diverse range of different providers across the sector, and their knowledge of things like workplace instruments is different. And that's one of the key things that those organisations are working with the sector on to really support them to ensure those instruments are compliant.
And how much has been spent on this?
So it's a $10 million program for the organisations, and all the grants for those organisations have been executed and are currently public, and the funding is allocated amongst those organisations.
And it's the amount that each recipient's got is public?
Yes.
We'll look that up. Thank you. Has any of the 3.6 billion, which is supposed to be a pay rise for 200,000 workers, been redirected towards funding any of these organisations?
No.
So this is...
It's a separate program.
Separate program. How were these particular organisations decided upon?
So there was a range of... So we provided grant guidelines for the program, and the assessment against those organisations was done around 3 main criteria. I can talk those...
It was open tender then?
It was
a select
process, Senator.
Sorry, I just missed that.
It was a competitive grant process. It was restricted because it covers basically organisations that would have coverage of the sector. So some of the professional associations and things like that, but it was a competitive grants process where they had to apply for the grant, And as Mr Carr said, they were assessed against their suitability in relation to those conditions.
And those three criteria relate to the ability of the organisation to contribute to the objectives of the program, so supporting the sector in delivering, in applying for the grant payment, their project delivery plan, which includes the activities that are part of that, and then thirdly, the capacity and capability of that organisation to actually work in the sector, so it goes to coverage and their expertise in the sector.
How many providers did you say there were?
There are 8 that have been
Which is
found.
probably just as quick for you to just read them out then.
Sure.
I thought it might have been a longer list.
Yep.
So go ahead.
AI Group,
Yep.
there's the Australian Childcare Alliance, the Australasian Municipal Administrative Clerical and Services Union, the Community Early Learning Australia Limited, the Independent Education Union, Queensland's Children's Activities Network, QCAN Limited, which is the National Outside School Hours Service Alliance, SNAKE, the National Voice for Our Children Limited, and United Workers Union.
And why were unions engaged?
So they've been involved in the arrangements around the MEA, so the multi-enterprise agreement process, and we felt that it was important to have a range of organisations involved, not just those representing employers, but also those for employees.
Are you at all concerned that maybe smaller providers might feel the particular pressure to engage in multi-employer bargaining or enterprise agreements, even though that's not their preference? Given that it's a union that's actually driving the advice that they're getting?
So, Senator, the unions have received a minority of that funding. Most of that funding has gone to people like Community Early Learning Australia Limited, but we have been very clear that there's a range of options available to providers in terms of these agreements, and obviously we haven't recommended any of that, and we've been very clear to the providers as well that they must be clear to providers, if that makes sense, of those choices available to us. But again, Ms Crane or Ms McCarran might be able to help.
So I think backing that in, Senator, just in terms of engagement, those providers have been engaged to do that work. The department will also continue to work with stakeholders and put communication material out, run webinars, and consistently across that we have indicated what a compliant workplace instrument looks like, the criteria that needs to be in that, and certainly have made sure that it is, if any questions have come to us around a particular type of workplace instrument, we've made sure that there's a range of options there so people can make that choice based on what their circumstances are in their business.
And I'll just add to that as well that as part of the engagement grant, the department is working with those organisations on a regular basis to understand what they're hearing, the kind of questions they're receiving, and it also goes to those activity plans that they've put forward as to what they're actually doing with the funding that's being provided.
Is the Department of Government aware of union members pressuring educators not to sign an IFA?
Not to our awareness.
No, Senator.
So, in other words, their services forced to look at other options such as enterprise bargaining?
Not that we're aware of.
No information on that at all, Senator.
How much... So you said that the funding that's publicly available against each organisation. Why was the decision taken to outsource this rather than the department itself providing this support?
So we do both, Senator. But again, a lot of these organisations, the providers are members of these organisations. Is member the right word?
That's right.
And so they are used to these organisations providing them information and support around a range of issues in relation to childcare. So I'm assuming their member fees and cover those sort of things. And so it's a combination of both the department doing it, as Ms Crane said, we continue to do it, but also to enable broader scope for the 9,000, how many services are there? I should know, in total.
I'm going to say around 7.
So,
Okay.
So I'm curious then, why resort to this, having to get in a provider to help people with the application, help organisations with the application process? Wouldn't it have been better to just look at actually streamlining and making the process more efficient?
So, Senator, I'll start to answer that, and Ms McCann may add to that in terms of some of the other things we are doing, because, yes, continuing to streamline and respond to feedback is one part of that. But if we take Snake as an example here, there is a pre-existing relationship that Snake has in connection with ACOs and community. They are a trusted organisation. They work quite closely with the department and other departments on a range of matters, and so their reach augments the reach that we can get there. So this is complementary to the work that the department is doing. It is not instead of. And as Ms Akara has already said, we are meeting regularly with those organisations. So that gives us a chance to hear anything that they might be hearing from their members or the people that they've interacted with, because it's not restricted to just their membership base, so that, again, we can feed that back into the process or make sure we're updating our communication material if there is actually something that needs to be adjusted in there. But did you want to talk about the improvements?
I think that's right. So as part of that feedback, as well as the regular feedback loop we have with the sector that we're hearing from, we're making a number of improvements, edits to the entire process, particularly around things like updating our Q&As and our communications, but also in the application form, streamlining where we can, and making sure that it's much simpler and much kind of easier to identify things. So, for example, a lot of providers are getting some information wrong. So, for example, their CRN or their ABN wrong. So we're making it clear to them where they can find that information and having that as part of the application process. Also doing things like, making sure that we are... we've got kind of people available on help desk and kind of picking up the phone to have those conversations with the providers so that we can actually get through the information that we need to get to them and support them as they go through that process of having their applications assessed.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if you just go, sorry, if you need a few more minutes on this.
I've got a little bit more to do, but
do that.
I'm happy to rotate if you're wanting to.
Yeah, we'll rotate then if you've got quite a few.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no worries. All right, cool.
I've got another 10 or so minutes.
No worries, cool. Senator Brown.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start probably, I will start where I asked my question but I will remind you of the question.
Sure.
So I was wanting to talk about integrity measures. So in the 2024-25 budget, the government announced a range of new integrity measures to ensure the early education system is on strong foundations for future reform. Can you please provide an update on the key progress under the integrity measures, particularly on the childcare subsidy payment accuracy, please?
So, Senator, I'll kick off and then Mr Moon will continue. That particular measure builds on a number of other integrity measures that the government had agreed to. And so in responding to this, we'll cover off each of those and obviously we're tracking with them, which I'm pleased to say is quite favourably.
So Senator Brendan Moon, First Assistant Secretary, Childcare Division. In answer to the question, Senator, the progress in terms of the measures as at the 31st of December is the department's achieved a $318.2 million saving against a target of $187.4 million. That's primarily through increased fraud investigation and compliance activities, as well as the introduction of our electronic fee collection measure, EFT measure. Senator, combined, those results were estimated to deliver $869 million in savings over 6 years, for context, and that's from an investment of $221 million. This work, as Ms Crane has said, is part of our broader work to uphold the integrity of the childcare subsidy and the financial integrity of the childcare subsidy. And in terms of payment accuracy, in 21-22, prior to the commencement of the integrity measures, the payment accuracy was 93%. Since the commencement of the measures, the payment accuracy has reached its highest levels on record and has been sustained and improved further. Senator, in 22-23, payment accuracy for the CCS was measured at 96.2%. And if you look at that increase between the baseline and that performance in that year as a proportion of the CCS outlays, more broadly, that represents a saving to government of $354.5 million. Again, in 23-24, Senator, payment accuracy was measured at 96.4%, so an increase of 0.2%, and that added an additional $112.2 million on top of the prior year.
That's very good. So it's pleasing to see that it is sustained over a number of years and
we are really pleased,
improving.
Absolutely, and of note, Senator, this does have a lot of compliance and intelligence work, but also outreach with the sector. So we're also seeing increases in voluntary compliance, which shows in the broader increases against the integrity base of the payment accuracy base. And we are seeing more open dialogue and engagement with providers about support to claim correctly and get things right, rather than catch people when things go wrong.
I take it those savings surpass what your targets might have been?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah.
We're well ahead, is that right?
Well ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're well ahead where we actually had proposed we would be, which is as a result of the great work that Mr Moon and his team are doing.
Right. Okay, thank you. I now just wanted to go to another area. So after numerous reviews, including from Jobs and Skills Australia, the Productivity Commission and the ACCC, found that growing the early childhood education and care workforce must be prioritised to enable any future reform. Is there any data that demonstrates that the government's workforce measures are having a positive effect, including from the sector?
Senator, I'll let Ms Crane talk. The headline is, I guess, because we all like good news, that the number of staff have increased quite considerably over the last 12 months, and importantly, job vacancies have also decreased quite considerably. But I'll let my colleagues, experts at the table, give us the details.
Thank you, Senator. Julia Chandra, Assistant Secretary, Workforce Branch. So we have seen a really positive change in some of the numbers. We've seen the actual size of the workforce increase over the past 12 months from November 23 to November 24. We saw an increase of 17,900 workers, which is about 7.3% increase. The main indicator we look at, though, is the Internet Vacancy Index, and that does show a decrease in job vacancies. So between December 23 and December 24, the vacancies decreased by 22.11%, and in January we saw a further drop as well by another 686 vacancies. And then the third indicator that we've been watching has been the change in staffing waivers, and that has decreased as well. It was 8.9% in October 2024, and in January 2025 it's down to 8.3%.
Is there anything that you can tell me about that data? Is there state-by-state breakdowns? Is there anything else that you can tell me? I mean, they're very good figures.
I could probably just tell you a little bit breakdown in terms of the vacancies. So the biggest decrease, biggest decrease in the vacancies is actually early childhood teachers themselves.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, there's categories like centre managers, there's childcare workers, there's early childhood teachers. So what's really pleasing is early childhood teachers, the vacancy rate has dropped significantly by almost a third, 33%.
Yeah.
Which shows that we have more people who are training to become early childhood educators, both childcare workers and childcare teachers. And I think that's really important in terms of some of the initiatives that the government has put in place with states and territories in relation to some of these things. I don't think we've got a state breakdown, but we can probably take that on notice, Senator, if you're interested around that.
Okay, well, if you could take it on notice, I'd appreciate that, and any other information you can give me as well. And I think I might just leave it there then, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Grogan.
Thank you. Do you have any data on the worker retention payment since that's been announced? How that's if that's making a difference?
Making a difference. We went through some of the data with Senator O'Sullivan about the number of applications and things that we have. We've just done that. Is that what you're after? Or
But are you seeing it making a difference to people actually staying within the sector? Obviously, the intent of the payment is to encourage people.
It's probably a little early in that the payments are only since December, but the January data's gone down. But again, Mr. Curry, you might be able to help, or Ms. Crane.
That's right. So the January data is absolutely showing that there is a difference in vacancy rate. So, it's I think, probably hard to assume an exact causation from one thing to another, but that is, a kind of positive story as a result of things that have been done. I think anecdotally we also know from some parts of the sector, particularly Good Start, have certainly kind of seen a change in their practices and seen a change in the number of people that are staying with them and things that are people that are leaving or coming back to the workforce that had left previously. And their feedback has been that it's been in relation to the worker retention payment.
Well, that's good to hear. I have to say I was at a centre not so long ago, and they had a number of their people who were doing fee-free TAFE part-time online, and they were able to sort of combine the two, which was also making a difference to how those particular workers felt that their trajectory was going to look staying in the sector. So that's really good to see. Thank you. Now I'm interested to talk about the activity test. I understand that it was created by the coalition government in 2018 to go alongside the childcare subsidy. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So what was the rationale for the activity test? It's come up a few times today, and I'm just keen to understand the rationale behind it.
So, Senator, you are correct. It did come in formally at the commencement of the childcare subsidy in 2018, and the intention was to balance workforce incentives with affordability, ensuring that childcare remained accessible while encouraging parents and carers to increase their working hours. I think what I'd say is over the course of that time that it's been in place, there's been a range of evaluations, reviews and other stakeholder feedback about the operation of the activity test and more specifically the impact that it's had around things like access, affordability and workforce participation. Certainly in the submission that we have made to the committee, which is online now I believe, we've mentioned a number of those things around particularly in the terms of access, so families who are at the lower income and will struggle to meet those hours, get access, and therefore it has an impact on affordability as well. And some of the earlier evaluations of the childcare package itself did go to what impact the activity test had on workforce participation. Was it actually driving up? They couldn't find any direct link with it that it was actually driving workforce participation in that. But Mr. Curran, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything to that in terms of some of the other rationale and pieces over the last 6 odd years.
I think that's right. I think that what we've also heard obviously from the PC and the ACCC and a range of other reports is that it does tend to kind of penalise those most disadvantaged who would actually benefit the most from attending a quality ECEC service.
Right, so sort of counter to its intent.
That's right.
If you would. Okay. And because it did, I mean, it did upset lots of people. And it has been called punitive and Australia's most hated policy. But the reports that you've recited, I believe some of them did call for replacing the activity test with the 3-day guarantee, that 3-day guarantee of early childhood care and education. What evidence did they put forward?
PC review centres? We could probably talk about...
Well, I think there was the Productivity Commission, the ACCC, the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee, the Women's Economic Equality Task Force and the SA Royal Commission all had recommendations. It seemed to be quite comprehensive in terms of get rid of the activity test, bring in a 3-day guarantee. So that, I mean, they're two very binary pieces. What was it that made them say that the activity test should go and it should be replaced with a 3-day guarantee? Sure. What was the rationale there? What was their evidence?
So I think that there's obviously they all had kind of slightly different takes on what their evidence was, but predominantly it was really about that disadvantaged cohort and the fact that it creates a barrier for families who would potentially otherwise use early education and care, and that this is just something that creates another sort of challenge for them, either in terms of the design of it or the complexity of having to meet those requirements before their children can attend.
I think the other piece that was particularly borne out in some of those reviews, Productivity Commission included, is apart from the financial impact that it has, with a bigger portion going on the spend for childcare subsidy for those lower income families, it was a barrier for those children who would most benefit from access to early childhood education and care. So given that we have a system that is intended to serve dual purposes, it does have a workforce participation component and an early childhood education, that component certainly wasn't coming to bear for those who are vulnerable and disadvantaged at that lower income end.
Senator, the last thing I'd add is that on top of, as well as that, much of the evidence also found that people with differing incomes or shift workers would often fall above or below different thresholds. So some of the uncertainty about how many subsidised hours the family might be eligible to led to a bit of reluctance or unwillingness to engage in the system.
And so that would apply to sort of casual workers as well?
Yes, Senator.
And, okay. All right. And has it been well received by stakeholders?
It has.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. But obviously not universally supported. Angie Bell, the federal member for Moncrief and the Shadow Minister for Early Childhood Education, put out a press release on the 13th of February, which was the day that the bill for the 3-day guarantee went through. And she said that the 3-day guarantee will not increase access or equity for children, rather it will achieve the opposite. Is that a perspective shared by many?
Senator, I'm not sure that we could comment on other views that we might not have seen. Certainly in terms of those that we had, it was overwhelmingly in favour of the changes that were being made. I think some of the comments that were made possibly went around the access to a service or place, and I think in this committee previously we have talked about a number of measures that have either been in place already from the government around increasing service provision, or others which Ms Akara can talk to in a moment around increasing in future years through the Building Early Education Fund. But what I would say is if we look at what's happened to service provision even from September 23 to September 24, we can see 40,000 or over 40,000 new places that have been created across the country. We've often talked in this committee about the difference in major city access versus regional. Of those, we can see that 7,700 are in regional areas. So the system is growing, the number of services are growing. There is clearly still response needed. We know the PC and ACCC identified unserved and underserved markets, and so there is more work to be done in that, but there are more places being created. So some of what has been referred to in the commentary that you've got there, there are places being created for people to take up. Did you want to talk about some of the other measures?
I'll come back to some other questions I had there, but you've gone there, so I might just sort of... I did have some questions, and as I've said in this committee before, I spend a lot of time in regional South Australia, and there are a lot of problems, a lot of issues with access, and some of them are really difficult to solve because the number of little people who are requiring early childhood education and care is insufficient, and so there's got to be sort of more alternative, different ways of looking at it. And so we're doing a lot of work, like in the local community, with that. And there's a great group that's got together with the councils that are advocating for how that could go ahead, which is great. But I know that there has been, as you've said, there has been some work done. We have seen some significant increases in access and availability, but we're not there yet, as you have recognised in the past. But I am interested in the balance between metro and regional, particularly, in terms of how those services break up. Because a lot of people in the regional areas go, we don't get anything, it just goes to the metro. That sort of division, you gave me some round numbers that I didn't quite jot down. Sorry.
It's okay.
Do you have that in a sort of percentage? What are you seeing in terms of that percentage of those services, you know, that are going into the regional areas?
So I said, I'll redo those numbers, which, as I said, is the September quarter 23 to the September quarter 24. And so in that period of time, the increase overall was over 40,000 places. And if I do that breakup, I'll do it as service count. So there's the places track back to services. So there were 81 new services in inner regional, 21 in outer regional.
Okay.
So
that's good.
So the 7,700 odd places are across those locations. And so if you think about that, that change, we've seen the growth area is actually consistent across major city, in and out. It's about a 3.9% increase across those.
Thank you.
What's interesting, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the largest growth in terms of places has actually been in remote Australia. So
the largest percentage growth?
Remote Australia is the largest percentage growth. So it's been 3.9% in major cities, inner regional and outer regional. Remote was 4.1%.
That's great. I could keep talking about that all day, but I do have one other thing that I'm somewhat confused about that I just want to run through. Going back to the Shadow Minister for Early Education, Early Childhood Education, there's an element in the press release that she put out that I'm keen to understand. She claims that in the changes that were made by the current government, the Labor government, that we removed the priority of access provisions. Can you tell what they are?
So, Senator, the priority of access provisions were a component of the childcare benefit, which was one of the two programs that were in place before the childcare subsidy. Mm-hmm. Those provisions expired with the expiry of that legislation when the childcare subsidy commenced. So that was in 2017-18.
Okay. So 2017-18, they were removed?
Yes, Senator.
Oh, that's bizarre, because in Ms Angie Bell's press release, she says Labor has removed the long-standing priority of access provisions and is quite negative about that. So that's obviously just an error. No comment required, no comment required. Minister, this seems a little bizarre. Have you seen this press release?
Unfortunately, I haven't. Sorry, Senator Grogan. I do know Ms Bell, the member for Moncrieff, but I don't follow all her press releases as closely as you do, obviously.
Yeah, so she's basically said that on her release, which is the 13th of February 2025, has accused us of removing the long-standing priority of access provisions when we've just heard that they were removed in 2017-18, when I believe the coalition were in government.
So, Senator, I'll just confirm it was the commencement of the CCS program, which commenced in the financial year 2018-19. So that cut over.
So right,
it ends there, and yes, from July 2018, they ceased to exist as they formerly had.
Yes, implementation was in 17-18. I apologise.
Minister.
I'm sure Ms Bell is quite diligent and will be paying attention. I'm sure we'll be correcting the record at the earliest convenience.
Excellent. I shall look forward to that correction. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for being here. I wanted to go back to the worker retention payment, and I missed your answer, a question and answer from Senator O'Sullivan about how many, if this is what he asked, how many applications for the worker retention payment has the department received? And I apologise if I'm covering.
That's okay, we're happy to go there again.
So, Senator, the data that I'll read is current as at yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So 1,982 applications. And in terms of coverage, that covers 8,634 services, so 59% of all eligible services. And within those applications, providers have identified that coverage is for 148,101 workers, which is 74% of all eligible workers.
74%
Of all eligible workers.
of all eligible workers. How many providers did the government anticipate would sign up for the payment?
I've got the service number handy because it's one provider can have many services. So in terms of the services, the eligible services that were operating in the September quarter, which is what it was based on, there was 14,549, and I said we've got 8,634 of those on applications at the moment.
So you've got 8,000 odd applications of...
So 1,982 applications.
Oh, yes.
And that covers 59% of all eligible services, which is that 8,634 number.
Thank you. And I think I heard you earlier say that you have quite a lot of positive anecdotal information about people returning to the workforce and labour supply, including in relation to early childhood teachers in particular.
That's right.
Positive indications. Have you got anything sort of more substantive than, you know, Good Start telling you things are looking up? How are you monitoring the impact on the workforce?
Sure.
So, Senator, the workforce numbers that we look at, there's a number of things. So the change in the overall workforce numbers is one, and so that is trending up. We've seen that happen. So there's over 263,000 workers now in early childhood education and care. That was as at the November recorded data. Internet vacancies is another, and as at the January data for that, we've seen a significant reduction, which is quite positive, and I think that was one of the things that certainly Good Start had cited. So there was a 23.7% reduction year on year for this January compared to what we were seeing January last year, with the biggest change in that happening as a result of the early childhood
and your
teachers.
And your 263,000 workers in November, how did that compare with the year earlier?
So that's an increase of 17,900 from the November before.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have any information about why some providers haven't applied? What do you think's happening?
Senator, we only have anecdotal information, is clearly they don't need to tell us around that. So there will be a number of them who will be working through arrangements with their employees, particularly around what sort of workplace instrument. I have no doubt that there are some who are watching the experience of others and seeing what they can learn from that. It can be backdated, and so again, the need to get that in now is not pressing. As long as they meet the criteria and the conditions, including the coverage in the workplace instrument, they do have up to the 30th of June to actually put that application in.
So they have to get their application in by 30th of June, can be backdated. What outreach are you doing to get to those who haven't yet applied?
So we're doing a range of things. We obviously have departmental communications. We're doing a range of webinars. So we've done some previously. We're looking at doing some additional ones in coming weeks. We also have, we talked a little bit earlier about the engagement grant that the government announced in MyEFO that provides funding to a range of organisations to support that outreach, and particularly for those that have those connections with particular members or particular parts of the sector. That's through that program, and just obviously through existing kind of mechanisms that we already have with certain parts of the sector.
And of the applications you've received, what proportion have all been processed and approved? Are they all through? Like, how's that going? No.
No. So, Senator, one of the conversations we had earlier is that in order for us to execute a grant agreement, we need to have a complete, accurate and compliant application from the provider. The vast majority that we get from providers do not meet that criteria, and so there is some work that we need to do with them in terms of requests for information and clarifying what's in the application itself. So as at yesterday, we had 119 grant agreements that had been executed, and so that covered 38,642 workers. We have another 33 grant agreements which we have offered. They are with the providers at the moment, so it's not executed until they sign and send it back with us. That covers another 1,850 employees in that. The remainder we are working with the providers to get the missing information in their applications.
And what's the average processing time between applying for the payment and receiving funding from the government?
So, Senator, we don't hold that information, in part because no two applications are the same to process. This is a sector that has everything from the good starts of the world, without trying to drop them in it, which is obviously quite large. They were one of the MEA parties, through to sizable ones in the OSH sector who will have been lodging individual flexibility agreements, through to the smaller providers. Every single one of those will look and feel differently in terms of what it takes to process, how many times we need to go back to the provider and request information, and what it takes to actually get it through to the end, where it's a complete, accurate and compliant application for us to issue a grant.
So we've been contacted by some smaller providers who haven't received the funding from government despite passing on a wage increase to their eligible staff in December. They're frustrated as they expected to receive their payment in January. I understand that's what it says on the website, and are now out of pocket. What support are you giving to providers, particularly those small and family-run businesses who are financially strained as a result of those processing delays?
I think, as Ms Crane mentioned earlier, we don't have a system that identifies those providers that are already paying when they're applying, so we're looking at making changes to the application form to allow that to be much clearer to us so that we can identify them. For those that we are aware of, we're working very closely with them, really to support that provision of information to make sure that we have everything that is necessary to make that assessment and do it and start it as part of that process. I think for additional context, as I was going to mention before, out of all the applications we've received, only one has come in that has been complete and accurate from the commencement. Yeah. So there is a lot of that kind of back and forth with the provider, but we are well aware of some of them that have notified us and working closely with them.
So now you are identifying people who are making the payment and accelerating them to the top of the queue to respond quickly. Have I understood that correctly?
We are in the process of updating the application form to allow that identification to be made. So it's really relying on them contacting the help desk, contacting us, working through those grant recipient parties to let us know about those circumstances.
When can they expect to receive their payment?
I think it's difficult to say because it depends on the information that has been provided, depends on the ability of the whether the instrument they're providing is compliant and what that actually means, because all those requirements have to be correct before we can process. That's right.
It's fair to say, Senator, that we are doing everything in our power to go as quickly as we possibly can, including increasing staff. Ms Crane's very focused on this. We are very committed to getting those payments to providers as soon as we possibly can, once we have the information available.
I'm sure they'll be eager to hear that and hopeful of the support. Has the department done any work on what the wage payment system might look like beyond the 2-year grant period? Maybe this is a question for the Minister.
Sorry, Senator Pocock.
Has the department done any work on what the wage payment system might look like beyond the 2-year grant period?
I think it would be fair to say that the government will have some more to say about that in due course.
In due course?
Yeah. The department might be able to add something to it.
Are you doing work on it?
Senator, there is a broad range of reforms that are underway at the moment, and I think the response that the Minister and others have given previously is that anything beyond the life of the program would be considered in the broader reform context.
Okay, thank you. I want to go now to a particular centre, the Windsor Community Children's Centre. I want to discuss the slated closure of that centre, which is community run. It's very high quality. It's not for profit. It's exactly like the kind of centre that I used myself and is much valued by our communities. I understand my colleague, Senator Hodgkins-May, has written to the Minister for Education and the Minister for Early Childhood Education twice, urging the government to work with Stonington City Council and the Victorian Government to buy the site from its current owners, Swinburne University of Technology, who were seeking to rezone and sell the land. In response, they said they have requested the centre, state government, university and the council to note their concern. I understand that Stonington City Council has also written to the Minister for Early Education several times, seeking support to buy the land. Minister, has the government met with the City of Stonington and or the Victorian Government to discuss the closure of Windsor Community Children's Centre?
What I do know is that the member for Macnamara, Josh Burns, has been very active on this, along with Ministers Clare and Minister Ali. We certainly support the ongoing operation of the Windsor Community Childcare Centre and recognise the importance of it to the local community. They've both visited, Ministers Clare and Minister Ali have both visited the centre along with Josh Burns, the member for Macnamara, and made representations on the service's behalf. I do understand that they've, I think it was written to both Swinburne University and the Victorian Government about this matter. They've asked them to consider the options that will support the centre's long-term future, particularly with regard to the wider impacts that that service has and provides for the local community.
Has that, I mean, my question was particularly about whether the government has met with the City of Stonington or the Victorian Government specifically to discuss the closure?
I'd have to take that specifics on notice unless the department might be able to help me out in regards to that.
I'm not aware, Senator. No.
Could you take that on notice?
Yes, sure,
specifically.
Absolutely.
So I understand that at the Minister for Education's request, the Centre provided a brief on Commonwealth funding options, setting out mechanisms for the federal government to facilitate the sale of the site from Swinburne University to Stonington City Council. Has the government explored these options with the department?
Senator, no. So we're aware of correspondence that has gone back. In terms of actually asking us to explore other options beyond the programs that we have which do not cover land purchase, no.
So why did the Minister request the Centre provide this brief of options if they weren't even going to be considered? Just because it hasn't come to us doesn't mean that government may not be considering. Okay. I'm just in terms of what we have been given, we haven't been provided. Could you take that on notice then? I'd really like to know what happened there. A key recommendation of the Productivity Commission's report on universal early childhood education and care was the need for effective stewardship of the system where high-quality community-led services are supported and maintained. Minister, why isn't the government fulfilling your own promise of universal childcare and committing to working with the City of Stonington to secure the Windsor site?
Well, I don't think that's an accurate reflection of what's going on, Senator Pocock. I'm not being dismissive of this. I understand that you've come in to ask questions about it, and I understand Ms Hodgins May has previously, but that's not an accurate reflection of the work that the government have been doing. Minister Clare and Minister Ali have both been engaged on this. Our fantastic local member, Josh Burns in Macnamara, has also been advocating for the centre. I reiterated the view of the government about we want this service to continue, and that's what we will be working towards.
So I understand that on the 21st of February, Windsor Community Children's Service Centre received a letter from the Victorian Government advising them that they will not be contributing to the purchase of the site. Now, the only way this centre will be saved is by the federal government committing to fully support Stonington Council to purchase the land. The Australian Greens have pledged $12 million to save that centre and facilitate the council's purchase of the land, which they would, as a party, we would make a priority if elected in the seat of Macnamara. Minister, why can't you and why won't you, or will you, match that and commit to saving the centre before the election?
Well, the Greens political party often go around making lots of promises, Senator Pocock. I've never seen them actually implement one of them in government anywhere ever. What we want to do, we understand the importance of the centre, understand the work that the local member, Josh Burns, has been doing. Minister Clare and Minister Ali are highly engaged working with him and want to ensure that the service continues into the future.
Well, I don't want to get into a lot of political theatrics. However, I will say Greens pressure does work. We have achieved a number of things: $3 billion into housing, the right to disconnect, dental for children into Medicare, and other things. But we won't continue with with that. I can see we will not agree. Can I go to the Building Early Education Fund? In December, last question?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Great. In December, the government announced it would be establishing a $1 billion Building Early Education Fund to build new and expand existing early learning centres in areas of need. Just curious, how are you defining areas of need?
So, Senator, the department is just finalising that methodology right now and looking at a range of details, but we are including things like where we know there are already places, so looking at existing supply, looking at future demand, particularly in relation to population growth for that 0 to 5 year old cohort, and also looking at definitions of disadvantage. And we're working with the states and territories to understand how they assess their kind of areas of priority to make sure that they're complementary as part of the fund.
So will for-profit providers be eligible for those funds?
So that will be a decision for government, but they have stated that their priority is not-for-profit provision.
So, Minister, do you have any comment to make on that in relation to these funds being available to not-for-profit or for-profit as well?
I'd have to take it on notice.
Thank you. And will those centres have to meet a minimum new level of national quality standard, and if so, what level?
So they will have to meet requirements under the NQF. There's no discussion as yet as to whether that will be different than what exists currently.
Okay. On February 19th, the Prime Minister tweeted that the government are going to build 160 new not-for-profit centres. Will these be funded through the Building Early Education Fund?
That 160 does relate to the Building Education Fund.
Great. What quality standards will those providers have to meet then?
So it's still to be determined, but at this point there would be certainly nothing less than the NQF.
So those funds will provide capital grants for the construction of new centres, very welcome, but not operational funding. Where will the operational funding come from to sustain centres in areas which have not proved to be commercially sustainable?
So I might start and then maybe you can move on to Mr Wyman, but I'll just clarify that $1 billion program. There are two elements to it. So there's the first component, which is the grants component, and that's the $529 million, and that will be solely around capital. That second half, which relates to the owning and leasing part that the government will investigate through a business case, that could be extra. The expectation at the moment is that it will be, depending on what the business case comes up with, as to how that will be implemented, that owning and leasing. But in terms of other programs that we already have for operational funding, I'll get Mr Wyman to talk about.
When you say owning and leasing, just so I understand you correctly, you are saying that will be a form of contribution to the operational costs?
It will depend on what comes through the business case. That will be part of the business case that looks into how that extra 500 will be designed and developed.
Anne Twyman, First Assistant Secretary, Early Learning Programmes and Youth. Thank you. I think that we're still working through the interaction with existing programmes. So as you may be aware, Senator, we've got the Community Childcare Fund, which is in regions now, which is actually funding sustainability. So it actually funds, programmes to stay alive in thin markets. Yeah. We need to have a look at the interaction of that, because that is also a programme that is doing some good work in terms of sustainability, but that's not necessarily exactly what this programme will be doing as well. So it's about creating new ones but ensuring they're sustainable, so we're working that through as well. So it's the interaction of those, and then of course there's a range of other programmes including in-home care, etc., but it's mainly the CCCF fund that will have the interaction with the Building Early Education Fund.
Right. Thanks, Minister. Thanks everyone for your answers and for all your hard work. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much. I just want to go back to the Worker Retention Grant Program. Before I do, though, I just want to table the full media release from Shadow Minister Angie Bell. It provides the context that is quite necessary to the questions that Senator Grogan was asking before, and the Minister's cherry-picking of points that were raised in her media release. It's very clear from what Minister Ali was saying is that in relation to the priority of access provisions, she was talking about the activity test, and simply removing it means that you'll have people that are stuck languishing on wait lists behind those that don't because of the lack of access to childcare places. We'll cover this in further questions on the activity test in a moment, but I thought give people a chance to actually see the full context of that, of what was said, because it's quite misleading the way that those questions were put. Now, so I want to go back to... the,
Can I just intervene just for a moment? I just want
you could maybe when I've finished.
Table, just
I can take
I'm sorry, Senator Henderson. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the chair. No, it's Chair. I wonder if I could just table this one.
Because I feel like I've just been verbal a little bit there.
Can we?
Okay, it's the same thing.
I'll go back to Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I believe it's the same thing. Okay, so can I just get an understanding of the funding formula that's used?
So the funding formula hasn't been released.
Oh, it hasn't been released.
It's a decision for government whether it's released or not.
Yeah, but so why, Minister, we keep hearing this, and there's many media articles referring to this, and particularly smaller providers are concerned by the fact that that's not released. Why is the government keeping it a secret from providers?
I'm not aware that we are, Senator O'Sullivan. I think that the government's in...
Government to release it, it's not released.
The intention of the government has been clear in that we believe that these workers have been undervalued.
Released?
Do you want me to answer or do you want to interrupt? It's been clear that our view is that these workers have been undervalued by the previous government. They deserved a pay rise to be recognised for the importance of the work that they do, and that's what we've been implementing in government.
Do you acknowledge that providers are being forced to apply and make big budget decisions essentially with a blindfold over their eyes because they don't understand what the formula is and how it will actually work? Do you really think this is fair for these providers? And it's fair of the government to hold that back?
Well, we certainly believe that those workers deserve a pay rise, and I think the department have talked through the work that they are doing in terms of helping those institutions provide with support to put in an application. We want to see as many workers as possible get a pay rise, one, because we think they deserve it, but two, it's a recognition of the important work they do, helping to educate our young people.
Providers are saying that one of the reasons why they're not able to apply is they're uncertain about what it actually means for them. So why don't you clear up that uncertainty and release the formula?
Well, I think it's very clear what the government wants to achieve in regards to its policy, and that's what the department are focused on implementing.
So, Minister, with the greatest of respect, that's just a bit of a word salad. I mean, it's very clear. Providers just want some clarity, and the government is not providing that, and that is actually preventing you from fulfilling what you're saying is the intention of the policy.
Well, I disagree with that, Senator O'Sullivan. I think it's going to be one of those ones where we're going to butt heads on. I think that the government intent is there for everyone to see, and obviously the work of the department is focused on ensuring that we can deliver on the intent of what we want to achieve.
And okay, and I will move on, but the reality is the number of applications received to date is way off the trajectory that would be required to meet the 200,000 that the Minister has said will be able to receive the benefits of this. With only 29,000 applications dealt with, it's simply not enough. So how many applications have been rejected to date?
So, Senator...
Senator, before Ms Akara answers that question, we can also probably help with your question around certainty, because there has been information provided to providers to give certainty on what the funding covers and process should it not cover that.
That's right. So there has been a lot of communication provided in relation to scenarios. So we've put a number of options up or information up on the internet, to explain different kind of arrangements for services, so they can hopefully see themselves in those scenarios, and that's actually provided some information around how the funding is calculated and what it might look like if they do apply. We also have been doing specific cameos for services, so if they've provided us with their information about their structure and their setup, we have run cameos to identify what their funding will be. In addition to that, we also, since last estimates, the government introduced a 20% floor. So what that means is that any provider that applies and then finds that they're not getting the wage increase fully covered, plus at least a 20% contribution towards eligible on costs, there is a review process where they will automatically be given sufficient funding to top them up to that 20% level.
How many... Sorry, my question though was how many applications have been rejected to date?
So none.
None, okay. have any providers written to the department claiming the funding they are receiving is not enough to cover their expenses?
So that goes to that review process that I was just mentioning, and we've had 3 applications to date on that.
3. Thank you. Is the government keeping track of which services have received the funding and increased their fees since August 24?
That is part of the compliance and monitoring piece that the team is looking at. As part of the application process, that is one of the criteria, so that is quite diligently assessed before the application is deemed approved. And so all those that have been approved for the for the payment and have received an agreement or an offer have not breached the 4.4% fee constraint.
And what's the ongoing due diligence that you do to make sure that they're not increasing their fees by more than 4.4%?
Yeah, as part of our normal administration data that we receive through the CCS system, we're regularly doing checks around what that data is that comes through, which does include an assessment on fees and then a cross-check to those executed agreements, so those providers that have been found suitable.
In relation to the guidelines update on the 22nd of November, who made the decision to change the requirements for the workplace instrument?
I might ask Ms Chandra to come up and...
Because this, requires cover for 95% of educators in the service.
Thank you, Senator. So that change was made on advice from Australian government solicitors that we, in order to make sure that we weren't discriminating by way of any workplace instrument, we needed a process which allowed us to assess that all fair and reasonable efforts had been made to get to 100%, but we needed to reserve the right for employees not to feel they needed to sign on to an IFA.
But am I right that you've got to have 95% of the workforce of the workplace must agree to signing up to multi-employer bargaining or an enterprise agreement or individual flexibility arrangements?
So that's the threshold that's been set to help us assess, but there's also flexibility in the guidelines for us to determine that all reasonable efforts have been made to get to that threshold and to accept applications where that has been demonstrated.
So we've heard from the sector quite closely around that there are some people whose employees are overseas for an extended period of time or who are relatively casual, so they haven't come in for a couple of weeks and then you might not see them for another couple of months, but they're still on their books. And so we heard that from the sector, so that's why we added that we wanted that flexibility included to allow providers not to be penalised from applying if that was the case for them, particularly for small providers, because that 5% could be one person.
So following on from Senator Pocock's question in relation to large providers and smaller providers, does the government acknowledge that the wage retention program processes have been harder on smaller providers compared to larger providers who would have the systems and the wherewithal to be able to manage the applications and go through the processes?
So, Senator, I don't know that we would characterise it as harder. I think the same conditions for the eligibility for that funding is there, as we would expect from any program of government. There are conditions that need to be met. In terms of what we're seeing for the applications that are going through, the vast majority of applications that have been there are from smaller providers that have been approved. So, but what we've seen in terms of those applications that were progressed, 78 of the providers have one service, 33 providers have 2 to 24, and it is only 8 providers that have 25 or more services. So that they are applying, they are going through the process, we are working with them. We are also, as Mr Carr mentioned earlier, working with a number of other providers who have small providers as their stakeholder group to make sure that at every point they understand what's needed, they have questions around it, they can clarify, and they are supported through that process.
Finally on this point, what's your reflections? Point to an article in The Australian where it says that your grant is a joke and a provider says that that the process is an absolute joke. After spending months of time and money liaising with an accountant and a solicitor, we applied in early December to know exactly what we would get before deciding whether or not to opt in, and it goes on. There's a complexity here. So, what's your reflections on that? When providers are feeding back that this is overly complex, that it needs to be streamlined to be able to meet the objectives.
So I think as Mr Carr outlined earlier, in terms of the conditions and what's there, those conditions are there for a reason. So the support that we are providing around that is going to understanding what it looks like to meet those conditions and actually have a compliant workplace instrument or a completed application. In terms of the process for applying, some of the things that Mr Carr mentioned earlier go to how we make the application form clearer for people around where to find the information, such as their ABN or their customer reference number or the types of information that they might be looking to provide. So there is a continuous improvement process through feedback that we get from stakeholders, as well as the feedback from staff about what they're seeing, and that informs either the way that the application form looks or the outreach that we do with stakeholders, the communication that we have in our weekly newsletter out, or now more formally through the providers that have engaged to work with us and support that. So I think the reflection, Senator, is there is always room for improvement, and we are happy to look at where we can do that. That is a continuous process for us.
And I guess what we're pleased about is the data we gave you earlier, Senator. We've now got applications that covers 148,000 workers, and so we'll be processing applications which providers tell us would cover 148,000 workers. They've all been received. Take your point about there are issues that we need to improve, and that's what we're working on. But the majority of workers are now part of an application process.
Can you come back to us with and today if you're able to, a breakdown of private, large, small providers in relation to those numbers? I don't want to take the time up now because I realise the time we've got.
To be on notice,
but if it's okay, yeah.
That'll take a while because that's 8,000 services we have to go through.
Okay. All right. I want to go to the 3-day guarantee. Sure. So, back to the point that I was making in reference to Shadow Minister's Angie Bell's press release. The concern is from providers, from parents, from stakeholders in relation to this is around access, because the argument is that if you're increasing the number of people that are eligible already on a stressed system, aren't you actually limiting then the access for people in an already stressed situation? So is it actually a 3-day guarantee then if you can't actually access a place?
So, Senator, the way that it has been described is access to subsidised care. Clearly take the point, as has been made by others, around there are parts of Australia where we would say that access is considerably limited because there is not a place at all or a childcare centre there. But that this measure goes hand in hand with a range of others, some that we mentioned earlier around the Community Childcare Fund, some that are coming in terms of the Building Early Education Fund, and even the workforce measures and worker retention payment. They go hand in hand in building that supply, ensuring there's a service, ensuring there's a place, ensuring there's a workforce there. The measure itself, when the department looked at the expected increase, it is only a slight increase in demand that is actually expected in terms of people trying to take up additional places. We clearly don't hold waiting lists or other things. We did seek insights from stakeholders, and the preliminary insights from ALACA, whose membership base covers profit, not-for-profit and across the country, indicate that there is capacity within the sector.
So I'm curious about that. So if you're not expecting a significant material increase in demand, then what's the rationale for it?
So, Senator, there's a range of rationale for it, and I'm sure Mr O'Carroll will add some other things to it. As we talked about earlier, the guarantee is the or replacing the activity test, the components that are there for 3 days at the moment are a barrier to children who would most likely benefit from ECEC from actually accessing it, because their parents are unlikely to take it up, or it becomes unaffordable, or that debate about whether they do put in for that day or so, and the decision about what else they do. It was not stated, and certainly nothing that I have seen guaranteed, that every centre that you walked up to would have a place there. But it was removing barriers to accessing those 3 days and providing a level of entitlement that at the moment the activity test that's in place does not do. Ms O'Carra might add some other points there in terms of some of the other rationale.
I was going to add just a little bit around.
One moment, just to confer with the Chair. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say that one of the other main rationales, as Ms Crane was talking about before, was about affordability. So we know that there are a lot of families that are already using 3 days that are not currently entitled to 3 days. And that's where those beneficiary numbers come through, because they will...
So if you're a carer and you need Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, because that's the support you need, but the service provider in your area can only provide Thursday and Friday, then where's the 3-day guarantee?
So, Senator, I think some of that would go back to what you're probably describing. There is an underserved market, and the 3-day guarantee is not intended to address that. The Building Early Education Fund, some of the other changes that are there that go to supporting the pathway to universal access.
Exactly. So Minister, how can you call it a 3-day guarantee when you can't look Australians in the eye and guarantee them that they'll get 3 days?
Well, that's what we want to set out to achieve, because we think it's important for families. We think it's important for young people.
Might look good on a poster, on a flyer, on a social media post.
We think it's important for affordability as well. And I would point out that we've had a strong agenda of reform when it comes to early childhood education since we've been in government. We have not seen one policy from the opposition. They've opposed a lot of what we've done, which has gone to affordability and more access. Every one of them, the opposition have opposed.
We're certainly not going to use words like guarantee when we know, hand on heart, that we can't look Australians in the eye and tell them that there is going to be these places, that there will be these places.
We know you voted against...
another slogan.
We know you voted against the legislation.
When the legislation itself says that all courses may not be free. I mean, these are just marketing exercises.
Well, we know you voted against the legislation. We know that you oppose fee-free TAFE as well, and that's exactly why there's such a big risk for this country.
Your own legislation says that not all places will be free. And here, we've just heard from the department.
A bit of decorum.
No, fair enough, Chair. We've just heard from the department that we can't guarantee it because there is a limited number of availability in the system.
Well, 3 days of subsidised care are guaranteed by the Labor government, and we know we need to build more systems, which is why we're doing that.
We've just heard the evidence.
That's why we've got the $1 billion fund to build more centres.
So, let's move on.
Well, I want to ask about those too.
What do you expect educators to do when parents come to them demanding their 3 days of care, even if it's not possible, because that's what the government has promised? Will the government be offering any sort of support for these services to be able to manage that?
So, Senator, the language that has been used describes 3-day guarantee of subsidised care. At the moment, parents aren't sure what they're actually entitled to, particularly for some of those parents who may work casual, irregular hours or other things, because they cannot take up those places and do it on the risk of not knowing what it's going to do to the actual cost. A significant number of those families with irregular hours or low incomes, once they actually access care that is above and beyond their current activity test hours, they pay significant out-of-pocket costs. The guarantee is for subsidised care. So for those families, they actually need that care already, be taking up the place, but as Ms O'Carra has said, they're paying significantly more for that.
Can I ask, how did you land on 3 days and not 2 and not 4 or not 5? Why 3?
So it was one of the recommendations from the PC report, and there are a number of other reports that have talked about 3 days, including some reports undertaken by SNAIC. So the 3 days came out through the PC. It was certainly recognised as, you know, the starting point. There is some evidence around 3 days being an appropriate amount of early learning, particularly quality early learning for children.
As part of formulating the 3-day guarantee, did the government request the department to model a $10 a day or any other type of flat fee model?
So, Senator, certainly not as part of the 3-day guarantee. The 3-day guarantee is activity test focused, and so it's around the parameters for the activity test. And obviously, as we've mentioned, and you can see in the reports around those families that would benefit either in access or affordability, that is an activity test modelling piece.
So, but has the department have you been requested to model $10 a day or any other type of flat fee model?
So, Senator, I think we've responded to that question previously around we've provided advice to government on a range of matters.
Yes, and so I'm asking specifically on $10 a day or any other type of flat fee model.
We
Not
have
just a range of.
We have provided
specifically
advice
asking.
on a range of funding models, of which flat fee is one of them.
Okay, thank you. Senator Chisholm, can you confirm the government is considering a flat fee model for ECE?
What I can confirm, Senator O'Sullivan, is that the Prime Minister and the government are committed to making childcare as affordable as possible. That's our record in government, and that is something that we want to continue to deliver on. There's obviously been a strong reform process through what we've delivered, what we took to the election, and also the work of the PC, the Productivity Commission, and the work of the ACCC as well. And we'll continue that reform process. We want to ensure that it's as affordable for families as possible, but also that those young children get the best possible start in life at the same time.
So yesterday the Prime Minister, it's reported in the AFR that the Prime Minister told a business lunch that he will pursue a flat fee universal model if re-elected.
I'm aware of those comments, and I think they're in line with what I just talked about then.
Has the department done any work to respond to the Productivity Commission's Universal Child Inquiry? When does the government intend to respond to those recommendations?
So, Senator, the way and when the government responds is a decision for government. A number of the MyUFO measures that were announced in response to the Productivity Commission report and outlined as some of those next steps and starting pieces that are needed as part of a universal pathway to universal early education.
Can you confirm that the PC report, which was requested by the government, recommended against a flat fee model?
So I think that the PC looked at a range of models that it looked at. I don't know that it recommended against it. It didn't recommend it, be my reflection.
Sorry, that was the best bureaucratic answer
There wasn't a recommendation that said
Gold star.
it was against a flat fee model, I think is what we're saying.
So,
That's right.
You asked the question, does it recommend against it? The answer is no.
The sector has also raised concerns. The Australian Childcare Alliance issued a release on the 10th of December titled "New Report Raises Serious Doubts About $10 a Day Childcare." So, based on the Prime Minister's announcement, which might well be an election commitment, Minister, why is the government ignoring the Productivity Commission and indeed the sector itself?
Well, I think you're getting into hypotheticals there, Senator O'Sullivan. I don't think the evidence from the department about what the Productivity Commission said. I didn't hear a commitment to a $10 a day flat fee from the Prime Minister, but I did have other duties on yesterday as well.
Sorry, are you? Can I just ask? Are you confirming the Prime Minister said that, or are you saying you weren't across it?
No, I said I'm aware that he made some comments in regards to early childhood. I didn't see a commitment from him to a flat fee.
Ooh. The reporting was pretty confident.
Yeah, that's right, Senator Davey. But my question, though, to you, Minister, is why is the government ignoring that advice?
Well, I think the evidence from the department, who are more across the Productivity Commission report than I am, Senator O'Sullivan, indicated that it wasn't in there as a recommendation.
And the Australian Childcare Alliance are recommending against it as well. So the sector itself is not calling for it. In fact, it would be a retrograde step. When the government, can I go back to the removal of the activity test for 3 days? Can you please tell us if there are any priority of access measures as part of that?
Senator, not specifically as part of the measure.
Sorry, there's not? So, Minister Chisholm, how can the government say this policy will help the most vulnerable children when there's no priority of access as part of it?
Well, obviously we want to ensure that as many young people as possible get the benefit of an early childhood education. That's what we've been about in opposition. That's what we've been delivering on in government. The range of reforms that we've gone through have gone to that. There's a lot of elements to it which we think are important, and this has been a continuation of that.
When the government announced this policy on the 11th of December, my birthday actually, it was framed as an election promise. When was the department made aware the government would introduce the legislation on the 5th of February?
Senator, I think we knew quite a while because we actually developed the legislation, so that I think to the best of my knowledge is always our understanding.
Correct.
Sorry, sorry. I think that's the best. My understanding is that's always, to the best of my knowledge, that was always our understanding because we had developed the legislation. We were in the process of finalising legislation. That was not a surprise to us.
When did you start that process of developing the legislation?
The drafting for legislation? Yeah. So pre-work started not long after the measure was announced. Formal drafting, I think we had a drafter allocated in the second to last week of December.
Okay, so you weren't doing anything before the 11th
I should clarify, Senator, we had to work through a whole range of policy parameters and author the drafting instructions prior to a drafter being assigned to us, and then formal drafting of the legislation started in about mid-December.
Okay, so what modelling have you done on the impact that this will have on workforce participation, women's workforce participation in particular?
So the department didn't do any modelling on workforce participation, and we know in the PC report that it did identify that there would be quite a marginal impact on workforce participation. So the department relied on that analysis by the PC just because of the expertise of the PC in relation to that participation element.
So how much is this costing again?
So over the 3 years, it's 291 million. And
it's not going to do anything for workforce or marginally?
That's right. It's predominantly an affordability measure.
Mm. The government has said that 66,700 families will be better off and 100,000 families will have increased access. Can you explain how you came to these figures?
So the 100,000 figure relates to those families that that could benefit if they choose to increase their hours. So currently the families that are using less than 3 days per week that are in the CCS system. The 66,700 are those families that are using 3 days but are only entitled to less than that. So they will definitely benefit from the measure. So it's all based on current CCS data.
About the 100,000.
Sorry, so the 100,000 are those families that currently use less.
So to help me understand, what's the difference between the 66 and 100?
So the 100,000 is based on the number of families that are currently using childcare that are in our system that aren't using 3 days. So if they choose to, they would be entitled to more hours. So they could increase their usage up to the 3 day mark. Mm. The 66,700 are those that are already using 3 days, but based on the current activity test are not entitled to 3 days. So their subsidised hours are less than what they're actually using.
Okay, I understand. Have you done any modelling on how many families will now enter the CCS system as a result of this policy?
I don't know that we have done some modelling on that. I'll have to find the information on that and come back to you. But again, I think that the modelling illustrated that was relatively marginal.
Marginal. Okay. So with the 66,700 families who will be better off initially, do you have a breakdown of what subsidy rates those families are eligible for?
Yes, I do.
So, Senator, I'll work from, I'll start. So 500 families, a subsidy rate greater than or equal to 0 and less than 10. 800 families greater than 10 and equal to or less than 20.
Just keep going, we'll catch up with it later.
1,000, I don't know how fast you're writing. 1,100 that are greater than 20%, less than or equal to 30%. 1,300 families who are greater than 30% or less than or equal to 40%. 2,200 families with a subsidy rate greater than 40% and less than or equal to 50%. 3,500 families with a subsidy rate greater than 50% or less than and equal to 60%. 5,800 families with a subsidy rate greater than 60% or less than or equal to 70%. 8,800 families with a subsidy rate greater than 70% or less than or equal to 80%. 32,800 families with a subsidy rate greater than 80% and less than or equal to 90%. And 9,900 families with a subsidy rate greater than 90% and less than or equal to 100%.
Okay. So can I give you a cameo? So let's say a couple, David and Jenny. David works full time, and Jenny works 4 or 5 hour days with a child in school and a child at home. Are Jenny and David any better off under Labor's 3-day guarantee?
Maybe?
Well, we need more details.
Tell us that again, and it will also depend on the income.
We'd need income data, we'd need all sorts of data to be able to provide the answer to that.
But also it's a hypothetical.
Well,
David and Jenny,
it's not something fictitious. I mean, it's a scenario that...
But you know, subsidies are based on income. You haven't given us income information, so we couldn't possibly answer that question for you.
Yeah, fair enough. Can we get a breakdown of what percentage of families are using the subsidised hours that they are entitled to fully?
Take that one on notice.
And also families who aren't using their maximum eligible subsidised hours? Happy for you to take it on notice.
Yep.
Can we get a breakdown of families who are using more hours of childcare than they are eligible for under CCS?
I think we have that.
We may have to take that on notice, and we'll look through. Certainly in the response that Ms O'Carra gave earlier, in the 3-day activity component, the 66,700 are currently accessing more and paying more for that. But you're asking over the whole system, not just the 3 days. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. I don't know.
Conscious of time, Chair. I'll just finish with this. So are you telling us that in this 3-day guarantee, we won't actually have a significant impact on more children attending CCS, especially those who aren't engaged in the system? Because you said it's not material. It won't have much of an impact on workforce participation either. And at the same time, you don't have priority of access for vulnerable children or working families who need it most.
So, Senator, I'll break a couple of those things up. So there is no priority access at the moment, so that ceased to exist in terms of...
But the activity test
is it priority?
Actually drives that though, right?
Not in the same way the priority access guidelines had previously. So at the moment, if there are decisions that services are making...
It does sorry to cut you off, but it does from a workforce participation perspective, doesn't it? Because the activity test gives you access, if you participate in the workforce or training or whatever.
It does depend on the service. So when you apply for service...
Keep going.
That's right. And, Senator, we'll go back to the early testimony around whilst the intent of the activity test was absolutely to look at that link between recognised activity, particularly working and studying, and income, and subsidise accordingly. The reviews and evidence, including the evaluation of the package itself after it was introduced, indicated there was no link between that. That wasn't the deciding factor overall when parents choose or try and access. Your question around others coming into the system, so I think as Ms O'Carra mentioned, we are anticipating there will be a small increase, yes, from those families who are not engaging at the moment, but there will be a range of other reasons why families may not put their child in childcare. So this removes this as a potential barrier. If it's placed there, then there is access there and subsidised care, obviously within the guidelines around income limits and the like. You wanted to add?
So I was just going to say that the modelling that the department did do looked at additional children entering across the year, and our modelling estimates that there's around 1,600 extra children that aren't currently in the system. So that doesn't include those children who are currently using 2 days who might move to 3. These are brand new children into the system, and it's a very kind of high level assumption.
Senator Davey. Thank you.
Senator Davey. Senator Davey, just give us an indication how long you might be.
10 minutes?
Thank you.
I'll try. I'll try and behave. That is an interesting assumption of 16,000 extras.
Sorry, I misspoke. 1,600.
1,600, right. Does that take into account where there are, like where I live, there's 200 children on a waiting list?
Yeah. So it does take into account some supply constraints, particularly due to things like the workforce.
Which brings me to beef. You named it. I didn't name it. You named it. It's your acronym. It's a great name for a nat, except it makes me hungry. I'm quite interested in, you mentioned it earlier. It's split into 2 parts. It's $1 billion for building early education fund, better known as BEEF, 500 million for targeted capital, and 500 million in a contingency reserve to look at the government owning childcare centres. Is that correct?
That's right.
So with the capital grants, how the capital funding, will that be rolled out in a grant program? So similar to the community childcare fund?
So that the details are currently still being finalised, but there certainly is. We are working with the Commonwealth Grants Hub. They were provided funding in the budget as part of the measure. So at MAFO, as part of the measure. So we are currently working with them on arrangements and things around using them to facilitate the program.
So the government's media release from 11th of December said the capital grants would be rolled out. It said from July 25. Does that mean that's when they'll open and the guidelines will be, or that's when the funding will start to hit the ground?
So that is still to be decided, Senator, but it is the fund will roll out from, that's the language that has been used.
If they've announced it in a media release, doesn't that mean it's been decided?
So the details around that are still to be decided. So the concept of the fund is definitely the measure, and that has actually been announced, but the details that sit underneath that are the things that are still being settled.
Okay. they've announced that the fund will be rolled out from July, and then it's just a matter of interpretation as to whether I interpret that to be money rolling out, or someone else might interpret that to be that's when it'll be open for application. I'm getting, for those watching on at home, I'm just getting blank stares. It must be me. So we haven't decided when applications will open. It's to be decided.
Senator, I think as Ms O'Carr has mentioned, there are a range of details yet to be sorted before you could put a set of grant guidelines out. Some of the ones that Ms O'Carr mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure whether you're in the room for, went to, well, how do you identify the areas? What does demand look like? Vulnerability and disadvantage, very similar to some of the things that we've spoken with you previously about in terms of Community Childcare Fund. In this one, there's obviously states and territories mentioned, so we are trying to work very closely with them to make sure that what we are doing is complementary, but also they have a range of information that we may not have access to around what that looks like to ensure that in terms of that announcement, as it talked about, in terms of on or near school sites, we need to work closely with a range of people before we could say it's happening on this date.
So I suspect I'm going to get a rinse and repeat for my next question, which is because the media release also talks about outer suburbs. And so when we're talking outer suburbs, are we talking like Western Sydney, Frankston in Victoria, or out the suburbs more regionally? Obviously, I'm biased and I'm like, put all the money into regional areas and childcare deserts where people can't access any childcare, can't even go on a waiting list because there's no such service. But the media release is talking about outer metropolitan.
So that is part of that methodology work that we are doing, that Ms Crane also reiterated in terms of how we're identifying what those priority areas look like.
So, given the media releases talk about rolling out in July, and given you're saying there's so many details yet to be decided and a lot of work to be done, particularly with states, so nothing's been determined yet. We're not going to get a whole heap of election commitments for we're going to have a beef-funded childcare centre in Werribee in the lead up to an election.
So, Senator, that would be something for government to comment on. We can comment on what the department is working on and the role that we play. So we couldn't comment on what may or may not be an election commitment.
Okay. So none of the $500 million pool of funding has yet been allocated or contracted. It's just, it's sitting there waiting for further work to be done.
That's correct.
Is there any amount of that money to be contracted this financial year that you're aware of?
The only money that's in this financial year is a small component for the Commonwealth Grants Hub, but none in terms of the actual grant component is for this financial year.
So that would be for the Grants Hub to set up the administrative processes.
That's right.
Can you give us a breakdown of the forwards for this $500 million, or is that yet to be determined?
I can. So it's $100 million in 25-26, and then $200 million in 26-27 and 27-28.
And okay, that adds up. My maths isn't great either, so thank you for rounding it and making it simple for me. And as well as the outer metropolitan, when we're talking about the MyEFO actually said targeted to priority and underserved markets. Is that work you're continuing to do?
That's right. Can I just clarify something, Senator? So the entire measure for the capital component is $529 million. Just in case you noticed that extra money is for the Commonwealth Grants Hub. So there's a little bit this year, and then there's continuing money over financial years.
Probably the 29.6 for the Grants Hub setup, which
over years. That's
right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Is there going to be a breakdown for certain types of communities, or is this still work to be done? You know, so regional, remote, Indigenous communities.
It's part of that methodology work that we're currently undertaking.
Right. So then I want to ask about the other side of it, the 500 million contingency for potentially government ownership. Back in 2007, Kevin Rudd also announced that the government will build 260 new early child education centres. Is this a similar proposal?
I have to take that one on notice. I don't know enough about that previous program.
I certainly don't have visibility of it. It wasn't something we were asked to go and have a look at and compare. We would have to take on notice what the...
Because that only resulted in 38 centres being completed, and it just quietly disappeared. So it'll be interesting to find out whether it was done with the potential for owning. Is that where they're talking about we could put a centre on a school, attach it to a school, or is this still a total blank page we have not yet worked out?
So the 500 that's part of the second round, if you like, that's still an open page. So that's what the business case is intended to do, to look at a range of various options, the mechanism by which that the government could potentially own and lease services. The school site component is really about that first part, the grants component, and working with the states to support the building of capital on or near a school site.
I was going to say, have we been talking to the states, because they own the school sites. With the business case, how much of the 500 million is going to pay for the business case? Because if there's one thing that Canberra's really good at, it's funding business cases, and we don't necessarily turn a sod.
So there's 2.3 million allocated over 2 years for the business case. So there is money in this financial year as well as next financial year for that. And there are 2 stages to that business case work. And we're working quite closely with the Department of Finance, who are experts, I guess. They're kind of like the holders of the business case, the way that works and how it's run. And those 2 stages are really about that first stage being really about what are the various options, pretty much a blank slate, and then government receives that report and then will determine as part of that second case which options to look at in more detail and actually design the program based on that.
In any of this work, has consideration been given, particularly if we're talking about putting assets or capital building assets in vulnerable or remote communities, staffing and workforce?
So at the moment, the grants...
Sorry, just before you answer, just indicate how long might be Senator David?
I've only got a couple more questions.
Yep, keep it tight. It would be helpful if you can keep it tight, but I'll leave it to your good judgment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So for the grants component, I'm sorry, I've totally forgotten what the question was.
So has any thought been given to workforce and how to attract the workforce? Because I mean, I'm really looking forward to having a new centre in my town that, as I said before, has a 200 child waiting list. But we also need the workforce, and how do we sort of grow and harness our own workforce?
So that first component, that grants component, is really just focused on the capital. However, the government has a number of initiatives such as the worker retention payment, the professional development subsidies, a range of things that are already in train or have been announced that go to supporting the workforce and building that workforce. And I think we've recognised previously at estimates, and the PC has also identified the workforce as a key component of that supply piece.
And with the capital component, do you envisage, I think I know what you're going to say, but will it be an open grants process, so open to applications from anyone, or will it be by invitation only?
So it's still being determined, and that's what that priority kind of listing of where the areas are that we will identify that are in greatest need, that will be part of that work.
So that it's still yet to be determined whether community groups could apply as opposed to, or do they have to be accredited early childhood?
So they'll have to be CCS approved, and they'll have to fit under the existing NQF, so the quality framework. that will almost be a given. So those services will have to meet those requirements. I will also clarify that as part of that first round, we're not talking about just new services. It could be that a service may just need some capital to expand a room or make something fit for purpose. That would be part of that first round.
That's good to know. But does CCS approved, does that lock out local government? Because certainly in regional areas, some local governments are the only people who sort of can get the ball rolling.
We have a large range of CCS approved providers who are local government.
Yep.
Right.
So it would be open to everyone.
What about local government who are not yet CCS approved and wouldn't be unless they had a service?
As long as they could get the CCS approval, I think that would be part of the application process that we would work through, but it shouldn't preclude them from being able to apply just because they haven't currently got it.
Last couple of questions. How did we get to the $1 billion figure?
So that's a decision for government.
Okay. So, Minister, are you aware? Was it costed on a per child basis, or was it modelled, or did it just sound good? I mean, $1 billion does sound good.
Thanks for the compliment, Senator Davey. I'd have to take on notice in terms of what more detail I could provide you, but it's obviously a recognition of the government that we've done a lot in terms of the cost of early childhood. We've done a lot in terms of how we pay our early childhood workers, and this is obviously an important component of it to ensure that there's access for people, particularly in those areas that need it from a geographic point of view.
And supply has been one of my biggest issues because it is supply in the regions that we really struggle with. Were any other options presented to the government to address supply? Did the government consider anything else?
I'd have to take that on notice. Sorry, Senator Davey.
So, Minister, you are part of the education team and you're not sure whether you looked at any other supply options. You're not sure how you got to the $1 billion.
I wasn't directly engaged in the early childhood policy, Senator Davey.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your...
Senator Henderson.
Thank you, Chair.
And just have you thought about how long it might take, just so we have an indication to people? We'll probably go to a break after.
Yeah, look, I'm hoping in the next just 10 minutes or so, I'll keep it as quick as I can. Helpful. I just want to ask Secretary about some historical data, and particularly, obviously, the Department of Education's quarterly data. And I want to confirm that the average hourly fee for centre-based daycare in the March 2019 quarter was $9.55.
Senator, we wouldn't have 2019 data here unless my
It's
team
on your
does.
website, so it is...
But it's on our website, so...
Happy to...
I'm happy to get onto the website and have a look.
Yep, all right.
But I don't have that information to hand.
So it's in your own quarterly data on your website. So that was March 2019, $9.55. We then go to March 22. The average hourly fee for centre-based daycare was $11.20. So that's in 3 years an increase of 17.3%. Now I just want to go to the September 24 data, which I hope that you would be able to access. That's the most recent data. And that shows that the average quarterly fee for centre-based daycare in the September 24 quarter was $13.70. So between the March 22 quarter and September 24, which is 2 and a bit years, the average hourly fee for centre-based daycare increased by 22.3%. That's correct, isn't it?
Senator, I'll have to take that on notice. All those numbers you read out to me, I'm sorry, I can't calculate all those in my head.
Okay, well, I might just ask you to have a look at that data, or if Ms. Crane, if you got that in front of you?
Not back to that. No, I certainly have the September quarter data, but I don't have back to the numbers that you're referring to.
Okay, so if you scroll down on the main page...
Sorry, I have them printed copy. I don't have website.
Okay, well, if you have a look at... There is a chart that says average hourly fee by care type, September quarter 2024. Have you got that?
I'm typing.
And that says, and for centre-based daycare, that's $13.70.
Senator, we'll take this on notice. I don't think it's fair for us to ask us to jump on a website to check.
I'm not asking you to jump on the website.
Well,
I'm happy to table it.
Have we got that data which is on the website?
I'm happy to table this if that helps you. So maybe we could just...
And you'd like us to calculate things at the table? Is that what you're asking us to do?
No, I'm not asking you to calculate. I'm just asking for you to, so that you're clear about what I'm referring to. So just having a look at that increase, and I do need that back because I've got... well,
probably
it doesn't matter. No, look, it's okay. I've got it. So that increase, based on my calculations, is 22.3%, which is a lot more than the increase that I referred to, which is the 3 years between March 22 up until March 22. Sorry. So
from what date? Sorry.
So March 22, the fee was $11.20.
I thought you were going backwards. I thought you were from 19 to 22.
No, well, no, it was $9.55. That's where I started, Minister.
On what date, though?
So that was in the March 2019 quarter. So I went through that. So $9.55. Then it went to $11.20 in March 22. And so on my calculation, that represents an increase in 17.3%. And then in September 24, the average fee for centre-based daycare was $13.70. So that's in your own data, and that represents a 22.3% increase. So given that quite substantial increase, Secretary, on what basis can the government argue that childcare is cheaper under Labor?
Because, Senator, out-of-pocket costs, I think, are the lowest that they have been since... Help me with this.
So, Senator, the out-of-pocket costs that were recorded in the September quarter data has the out-of-pocket costs at, correct me, $3.97, I think it is, that's across correct. All care types. If you compare that back to the June quarter, which was prior to the cheaper childcare measure coming in, so that's what made the significant difference. That was at $4.22 in the June quarter 2023, and if you take it back even further to the first quarter of operation for the childcare subsidy, the out-of-pocket costs were at $4.01. So the out-of-pocket cost is lower now than had that measure not been introduced. There would be significant out-of-cost pockets for families across that period.
I accept that that was the case. However, the quarterly CPI data shows that since that policy came into place, out-of-pocket costs have risen by 12.7%. So any of the benefits, the so-called benefits, have been eaten away by Labor's homegrown inflation. And so I'm again asking, on what basis can Labor claim that it's delivering a cheaper childcare policy when your data contradicts that claim?
So even with the childcare CPI data, Senator, that is still cheaper?
That's right. So I have to check the number that you quoted, Senator, but certainly the childcare CPI from the ABS is 6.7% lower than it was prior to cheaper childcare being introduced.
The overall increase, though, is 12.7%, and so I would put it to you that when you look at the overall impact of inflation since this policy first came into effect, that the so-called decrease, given also the increase in the hourly rate for the average daycare centre, means that there is no cheaper childcare, because it may have been that way, but now that has been completely eroded by inflation.
That's the case.
That's right.
As the subsidies continue to rise, and as a result of that, out-of-pocket costs for families are less in September 2024 than they were in September 2018 if it hadn't been for the introduction of cheaper childcare
Or could you provide us with that data,
sure.
Secretary?
Absolutely do that.
Could you just maybe, from what you're reading, if we could get a copy of that?
So this is public data on business would be in there.
Yeah, yes, that is published data. And Senator, just to give you an example, because a Cameo Centre useful for this. So for a family who is on $120,000 with a child in a centre-based daycare for 30 hours of care per week, between the September quarter 2023, which is the first quarter of introduction of the cheaper childcare measure, and the September quarter 2024, so that's 5 quarters of data, there's a $2,768 better off figure than if that measure had not been introduced.
Well, look, I'm not going to consider particular scenarios, so I can't in my own head calculate to what you're referring. I'm happy to take that. Yeah, fair point, Minister. Fair point. I take your point. But we started with a 22.3% increase in the average cost per hour of a daycare centre. So we saw this massive increase. But as I say, back in March 2019, it was $9.55. And by September 24, your own data shows that went up dramatically to $13.70. And then, of course, and then I understand that there was the adjustment made, but those out-of-pocket costs, so-called savings, have been eaten away by inflation. And so any so-called benefit after that adjustment is being eroded. But the government hasn't been transparent about this. It never actually made it clear that there was a very substantial 22.3% increase in the average cost per hour of a daycare centre fees in just over 2 years.
So, Senator, I think as we've said, the comparisons that we would use is what a family would be charged out of pocket had that measure not been in there. There's probably 2 other points that I make. One, in terms of that kind of fee increase, I think it was the ACCC that made an observation in their report around the impact that a measure has, and that over time we would expect across the board that starts to increase. We've certainly seen that in other areas. But the other measures that have been put in place by the government, as we referred to earlier, go to some of that downward pressure that the worker retention payment is trying to keep on fees from increasing. So one of the conditions within that is that that fees cannot increase above 4.4% from the date of announcement. And given the coverage that we've got at the moment in applications, whilst clearly there's a monitoring exercise for us to do, those applications, in order to be eligible, we meet that condition to keep downward pressure.
I mean, there is such enormous upward pressure on the cost of running a childcare centre. I mean, the government's cost of living crisis, whether it's rent, whether it's food, whether it's all of the fundamentals of running a childcare centre, so many childcare centres are under pressure. And so I think there's been a lot of fudging in relation to this, including the very substantial increase in the hourly rate which has occurred under this government. And on that, I do also want to ask you about a media release issued by Ministers Clare and Ali on January 28. The media release says new data released today shows families across Australia have saved up to $2,768 since childcare subsidies came into effect in 2023. Can you please provide the modelling on which that figure was derived?
Senator, we're happy to do that. That scenario that I read out earlier is that exact case.
Can you provide it though? So can we have a look at that, please?
120, that's right.
Do you want us to read it out again?
Well, I know I'd like a copy if that's possible, please.
We're happy to take that on notice, Senator.
Well, no, the copy's there with, so I can't see.
What I've got is a list with the number. It's a table
with annotations.
All right, can we get a copy of the table before you then, so I can have a look at it? Because my concern is that we've sought to understand that claim, and including through the Senate, we made repeated attempts to obtain that through an order for the production of documents, and we've been told that the department needs more time to consider that request by Senator Chisholm. So we are seeking the proper modelling. We want to understand how you've come to that figure, because it just doesn't add up as far as we're concerned.
I'm happy to organise for a copy. This has my scribbles on it, but I'm happy to organise for a clean copy of the table. As I said, what this table is the, as I said, from the September quarter 2023 through to the September quarter 2024. It articulates that it's for centre-based daycare usage, 30 hours of care per week, the income for each of those families, what the old payment system cost would have been out of pocket, what the new cost is, and then that difference, which is where that 2,768 comes
Okay,
from.
well, I accept you can't hand that up with your own scribble, but if you could just provide us with a clean copy as soon as possible so we could perhaps look at that over dinner. Can I ask how many families we're talking about here?
On which component, Senator? Sorry.
Well, new data released today shows families across Australia have saved up to $2,768. So how many families have received what you say is that benefit?
So we don't have that in this particular table, but we can take on notice whether we can include that.
And also, you say up to $2,768. So what we'd like to see is the full calculations. How many families received what level of so-called saving, and we just want to understand how that's been calculated.
We'll have to take that on notice, Senator.
Please.
And again, because family circumstances will vary greatly, that this scenario has, as I said, those income levels and hours of care. I don't think we could give that to you across an entire cohort because those variables are different. But certainly, as I said, this one, when we give you the clean table, we'll have the income levels and what's there.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, and thanks, Chair.
Good, thanks very much. We'll now adjourn until 7:15.
Oh, there's no adjourn, please.